many of the American tech companies may not want to admit this, but basically that the TikTok algorithms and the design and the features of the apps is just superior to their products.
If we ban TikTok, what's going to happen to Twitter? Then what's going to happen to other platforms? You see, he can see that that's what's going to happen here. It's going to set the precedent, and whatever the precedent is, everybody's going to copy that.
I think he's changed his course with regards to TikTok because it was one of the things that got him, in my opinion, elected, and that's what he said as well.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
The fate of TikTok hangs in the balance once again. The popular video sharing app used by 170 million Americans went dark last Saturday, just before a federal law was set to take effect. U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday, just hours after his swearing-in, allowing TikTok to continue operating for 75 days. Why did Trump bring TikTok back? What is the fate of TikTok in America after a 75-day extension? To discuss these questions and more, I'm joined by Wang Haolan, a research assistant at the Asia Society Policy Institute Center for China Analysis, Edward Lehman, a legal affairs commentator and managing director of Lehman, Lee & Xu law firm, and Dr. Digby Wren, an external relations advisor to the Royal Academy of Cambodia. Welcome to the chat. So Haolan, TikTok was supposed to be banned in the U.S. on January 19th under the federal law. However, on Monday, January 20th, local time, President Donald Trump signed an executive order allowing it to continue operating for 75 days. What does this 75-day extension mean for TikTok?
Okay, yes. So I think the 75 days is sort of very important for the current fate of TikTok, as it means that sort of a breathing room for both TikTok and the users on TikTok, and give basically every policyholders sometimes to think about the path forward. Because then obviously that for TikTok to continue to operate under this new executive order within the U.S. market, this is the most important things for many daily users and also the merchants that sells stuff on the TikTok shops. Which is, I think, most evident to my sister as she was worrying about this on Sunday morning and asked me daily when is TikTok coming back. And it came back after Trump made clear that he was signing an executive order giving an extension. But so I think just this one also showcased that the 75 days is something that when the shutdown happens, it sort of gives the policymakers, especially members of Congress, a clear sense of what the consequences of this legislation was. I think clearly that policy thinkers, when they passed the ban, didn't think clearly about the consequences of the legislation. It is interesting to see how maybe legislators may change their positions or modify their positions coming forward in the next 75 days. But it's also interesting that I think the Oracle General Counsels, their legal departments, took the executive order at face value and reinstated TikTok's service, which I think they still have a significant liability attached to it, given that the law is still standing.
Edward, if we look at the ownership structure of ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, about 60% of ByteDance is owned by global investors such as Carlyle Group, General Atlantic, and Susquehanna International Group, while 20% is owned by the founder of the company, Zhang Yiming, and another 20% is owned by employees around the world, including over 7,000 US-based employees. Also, it's interesting to note that 3 of the company's 5 board members are Americans. Does this structure already comply with the U.S. sell or ban laws, 20% foreign ownership limit?
Yeah, the quick answer is it does not. I mean, I guess I'm showing my age here, but for example, in media companies, and a person that might be recognizable or not, a guy called Rupert Murdoch, who owns News Corp, and then he wanted to, this is a million years ago, but he wanted to purchase Wall Street Journal and a number of other media outlets in the United States, and I think Fox was one of those as well. And he had to actually change his citizenship from Australian to U.S. And so I just mentioned that in passing, but the sale or ban with regards to 20% ownership isn't really met legally, even outlining the things you just talked about, that because the foreign governments or entities are theoretically can access or misuse what the Congress or Mr. Trump or the executive order has deemed as sensitive information, that they've got this cap of 20%. So we've got, just breaking down what you said. So you got 60% of ByteDance is owned by global investors. Mm-hmm. That's the Carlyle Group, General Atlantic, Susquehanna International, like you had mentioned. Now, the question is, we don't really know how that's held. We have no idea. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head without looking at the public disclosures as to what that is. But that may or may not be in the United States. It might be held by a Cayman's company. It might be held by these special purpose vehicles. So, I mean, somebody can talk about it in theory, but how it is in practice is a different thing. So Carlyle Group, which is an American company, of course, and these other ones are American companies that they mention, but they might hold it in an offshore structure, which probably they would do as a tax advantage. And so that might not meet the tacit rules. So 20% of ByteDance is owned by Zhang Yiming, as you said, the company's founder. He's a Chinese national. So that is a problem right there. It doesn't meet the test. So the remaining 20%, like you said, is owned by the 7,000 by different employees.
The global employees, yes,
in the United States. Yeah. So it doesn't really. The answer to that question is it doesn't probably meet those standards.
Digby, President Donald Trump, he says that he wants the U.S. to have 50% ownership of TikTok in a joint venture. What do you make of Trump's proposal, and who do you think might be the potential buyers interested in purchasing a stake in the company?
As Edward has just pointed out, the ownership structure is already quite complicated, and that's got to be understood completely before anything can be put forward. But look, joint ventures, I think, are an obvious way to go for the impasse arises in technology transfer between nations. So between the US and China, for example, it's clear that, for example, CATL and BYD and other big Chinese companies, they're going to have to do technology transfers and joint ventures in the future. I think that's fairly clear. And this may be a model, if they can get a good model for joint venture on this, it might then also go back the other way for, Facebook and other companies, tech companies in America. So, look, it's going to be very important. But, look, basically a 50-50 split, I think, is pretty well impossible. It's going to be a joint venture, but how that would be worked out is going to be very complex, as Edward has pointed out. And I can't see that happening very, very quickly. But I think it can happen, and I think there's definitely a will in the States to make that happen. And I think there's an understanding, a deeper understanding by people involved in politics, in government, in tech, that this is going to be an important case globally for how the tech industry settles globally. Because right now, TikTok is the shining example. Tencent, of course, is not as popular overseas, but that's platform-based. And where it's going to go, of course, is content creation, and that's what TikTok really does, is a platform for content creation. Power is passing to content creators. So I think the concentration on who owns the platforms is going to become less important, and that's why this deal is going to I think, set a standard for that going forward. Pretty well every government now recognizes this and looks at this as being a real thing. So, that's national security at a very base level. And so that's always going to be part of the deal, that the data centers and all the hosting, everything has to be held in the country in which it's operating. And that's complex.
That is the case now. In America, like users' data are stored in America, and here in Asia is mostly stored in Singapore. So TikTok has been doing that already.
Yeah. But so they're going to have to do more, to meet any kind of a 50-50 arrangement. They're going to have to do much more. And of course, the algorithm, that's what everybody wanted to crack originally, was to crack the TikTok algorithm. How could they be so successful, right?
Yeah. Let me come to you, Haolan. We talk about the U.S. stance. In response to that, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said that actions such as the operation and acquisition of businesses should be independently decided by companies in accordance with market principles. And also, she says, if it involves Chinese companies, Chinese laws and regulations should be observed. In your view, would such a joint venture comply with Chinese laws and regulations?
So I think it's hard to say on the face value. It depends on what format of the joint ventures and what exactly goes into a potential deal between TikTok and its potential buyers. So I think that's pretty clear that the algorithm which operates the TikTok, which is I think the backbone of how TikTok's operate in America, which is designed by ByteDance and they have intellectual property over it, is covered by the export control law under current Chinese law. And that requires government approval on any such actions. But I think as the foreign ministry was pretty clear that it would not be necessarily the biggest problem as long as the transaction is in line with market practice and it's fair and square. And as Digby, I think, was talking about, this is going to be a very important case study for future Chinese companies in overseas and potentially other American tech companies in China. So whether it's legal or not, it's not necessarily the biggest concern, I think, at this point. It depends on how how the actual eventual deal, if there is one, going to look like. And that inevitably probably be much more a political question than a legal question in this area.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Edward, from a legal perspective, do you think the 50% U.S. ownership of TikTok complies with China's laws and regulations?
ByteDance is a Chinese enterprise, and then they've got to ask for approval before they make or divest or there's some way, shape, or form that they are going to be moving the ownership in some way, shape, or form to another company that's foreign invested. All right, so that's a given under the new foreign, the regulatory environment under foreign invested enterprises and technology enterprises. And, there've been a whole bunch of things that have gone into place since, since the ByteDance and TikTok came into existence in the United States. So like I said, they've updated the foreign investment law. They've updated the data security law since ByteDance went into the United States. They've updated the cybersecurity law that was in 2017 and data security in 2021. So what I find ironic, going back to the last question, is that Mr. Trump has said, well, maybe, and I think, I saw him say this, so it's not as if this is second or third hand. So he said maybe the United States government will buy 50%. I think what he's doing here is the art of the deal. He's actually building a foundational, kind of a bookend and saying that's a number that he would be comfortable with. I think the United States government has no business being in any kind of business like this anyway. But so I find it curious that Mr. Trump, who's, coming from capitalism, should say something like, the U.S. government should maybe take 50% of the ownership. And then they said, well, how would you do that? And he was kind of faded off a little bit with that. Maybe it would be done through private enterprise or not. But that was a follow-up question by the reporter. And then we have a comment here by the Chinese government saying this should be left up to market forces and this should be left independently to companies. I don't disagree, which is like the exact opposite, which most people would think would be hey, we're involved here, we're the people controlling it. But they're saying exactly the opposite, that this is up to market forces and this is up to the individual companies themselves. I think that both of these things you don't have to be perfect to be good. I don't think you have to, that this is necessarily, sort of a finite situation. The question is whether it can be loose enough to follow the laws, policies, and regulations of the People's Republic of China, especially with regards to data security and with regards to the United States and CFIUS, which is this group that discusses, who can own, foreign American assets. And we didn't necessarily talk about the potential tech giants who are interested in buying it on the last question, which would be like Microsoft, Oracle, Facebook. Again, Carlyle could take a bigger stake, General Atlantic, Susquehanna, or Walmart even, or Comcast would be a potential partner. So these guys would have to go through some kind of if it was any one of them, they would have to go through some sort of a vetting process by the United States government themselves. For example, Comcast owns a bunch of stuff in media already, and would this make them into some kind of monopoly or oligarchy? Same with Oracle and Meta and these other things. So there's a whole bunch of legal hurdles that need to be met. Whether China is going to be the biggest obstacle to this, I would say no, they would not be. On the books, it says that China has some legal say on foreign investment that is done by Chinese companies abroad. And there is data and cybersecurity questions that need to be considered. That would be Chinese laws, policies, and regulations, which would impede this in some way, shape, or form. But I don't see that is a genuine concern. And obviously the Chinese government has come out and said it's not. Now, that doesn't mean they speak all with one voice, but I think legally they've got some issues, but I think they can get through those points.
Digby, if we look at previous examples, like in Indonesia, TikTok previously faced the obstacles over there, but later resumed operations. So do you think that solution in Indonesia could be applied to the case in America?
So TikTok basically, there was a company in Indonesia. So what was the name of it? I think it's called GoTo. And they basically transport and online delivery, transport, shopping. And so, it worked out quite well. I mean, obviously the government was quite flexible about this. And so that company, GoTo, was deeply in debt. So ByteDance, TikTok provided capital. And so basically it was, merged the two companies. The company with the capital shortfall got their capital, and the ownership adjustment was made to suit the Indonesian government's requirements. So that worked out quite well, but the structure, the ownership structure, was not nearly as difficult as it's going to be in the United States, as Edmund has just sort of pointed out the complexity of that. So the Indonesian model is actually quite a good one, but then now you've got to find the partner in the United States for TikTok. And I think it's pretty clear that TikTok management needs to stay in place because they know how to run this business. They're not just going to hand over the management. And as other guests just pointed out, Chinese laws are going to cover the transfer of technology as well. So I think it's more complex than the Indonesian model, definitely.
It's just that, the Indonesian model, as Digby rightly pointed out, had to do with content moderation. I mean, there were some financial issues as well. At least that's what they were claiming. And then risk of inappropriate content being accessible to minors. That was a question there.
That's right.
The U.S. is kind of more focused on national security and data privacy concerns. Specifically, I mean, I'm not saying there's not things to learn there. There are definitely things to learn, and I think it's part of what could be considered. But their solution was centered on control filters, while the U.S. issue is dealing with so-called political issues. And then, Indonesia's got a civil law, which China has a civil law too, which means there's a law for everything. It's kind of form over function rather than function over form. Common law is based on case precedent, and so it isn't necessarily built, which means, they say that gay marriage is okay. That means that everyone in Kentucky or to Iowa, the clerk's office can give out marriage certificates, and people understand that, and that can happen in a day. In a civil law place like Indonesia, it could also happen in a day, but trying to implement that countrywide might be more difficult. And that being said, like I said, there's so many ironies with this particular thing. Is Mr. Trump, with these executive orders, this is a stopgap, and this is, we have, which is unique in the world, really, which is a balance of three. It's a check and balance of the judicial system, the legislative system, and the executive system. So the executive is overriding essentially the judicial system. It's overriding the congressional with these orders. And Mr. Trump is not the only one to blame. I mean, Mr. Biden, on the first day that he stepped into office, immediately overturned every single thing of the executive orders Mr. Trump had in place before that. So it's not, and then that has happened with various, not with such a pomp and circumstance like we have here, but it's an unusual situation because you're not You're not talking to legislatures. You're not talking to the court. The Supreme Court did make a decision. The Supreme Court is infallible because they're final. They're not final because they're infallible. But they made a decision to shut down on January 19th to shut ByteDance down at TikTok. And they did it. And so then it was, to the best of my knowledge, or at least what I've seen in the media, and then they turned it back on when Mr. Trump signed an executive order saying we'll give you 75 more days. And then that allowed, as a previous guest also said, that Oracle to be able to put that on their platform and not, they're worried about legal liability, which is astronomical and uninsurable and detrimental to someone's business. So this is, you're playing a very large stakes, and I think everyone's got their eyes on it in a business sense as well as a political sense as well as a technology sense with the algorithms and AI and all this other kind of thing that's becoming much more important.
And Haolan, a technical question: even if ByteDance agrees to sell shares and reach a joint venture agreement with the U.S., but we're talking about 75 days. Do you think that would be enough time for the company to amend the divestiture law, like considering, the legislative processes and regulatory negotiations?
So I think what you're talking about, the 75 days to reach and complete the process, my answer is probably no, given that any deals involving selling or making a joint venture involving TikTok, very popular software with 170 million users within the U.S. alone, is going to take a very long time to sort out all the details. I think as Lehman and Digby was talking about, the complex equity structure of ByteDance, and potentially they have to create maybe a carve-out, a TikTok global business that only cover the U.S., and all those data screening and the service changing will require substantial times. And on top of that, you have to find the appropriate buyers and meeting, I guess, also the approval of the Chinese in terms of the legal process, and also definitely seek approval from the U.S. government, as they will have to satisfy the full divestiture requirements laid out by the TikTok ban legislations. So I think the more likely possibility, if there's going to be an arrangement coming, is that it will either show substantial progress, which enable the Trump administration to make a determination, at least that the full divestiture is meeting that. That's part of the provision of the law. It says the president can determine that the app or the application concerns no longer controlled by a foreign adversary. So, quote unquote, speaking, an intra-agency process. Well, the law isn't really specific on the extent what the intra-agency process is, but it could seem possible that the president could make a determination given if there's substantial progress. And also, the United States Congress is an entirely different conversation here, as they are the initiator of this TikTok ban with the legislation they passed in last April. And it is possible, if there is substantial progress made, I think, that there will be a congressional extension or even just maybe a stay of the current ban. And that's something that the Senate Democrats, Minority Leader Schumer, was trying to bring before the transition of power, as they realized that TikTok was about to be shut down on the 19th. So I think that's entirely possible, although I think it's hard to say that whether Congress can act fast or can act slowly, given that there will be significant oppositions to any attempts by many of the hardline national security-driven conservatives and liberals. So going back to the initial question, saying no, so there will be some new arrangement, probably in the legislative area, maybe in the presidential executive orders, not an executive order, that's also possible.
Edward, it's very interesting to see the change of attitude from President Donald Trump. We know in 2020, he proposed and ordered a ban of TikTok, citing national security concerns. But last year, during the U.S. election, as presidential candidate, he changed his stance on TikTok. So why do you think Trump reversed his position on banning the app?
I think part of it is based on his age. He's 78 years old and probably didn't have as much familiarity with apps and with these types of things. Now, he won, 36%, or he had a 36% bump in young people voting for him from the previous election to this election. And part of that was because of TikTok. And he said it himself. I mean, so I'm not even, this is directly from the source. So that he was the one who said, I think we should take a second look at it. I think it's interesting because he's changed his mind with regards to what it was. And I think a lot of it had to do with his son, Barron, who is 18 years old and he's 78. So 60 years age gap between the two of them. And his son was integral in getting him on platforms like TikTok to be able to increase that generation of youngest voters, if you will, that are 18 and above, or into the 18 to 25 demographic, which is very hard, or 30-year-old demographic to get them to vote at all. That was maybe integral in getting. He took a lot more advantage of those type of TikTok than I think Mrs. Harris did. But I think that the other thing is that I think he thinks there's a way, and I'm not sure he's a tech person, but no, he's not a tech person. I think he thinks there's a way to be able to carve this up and do it safely. I'm not so convinced that there is. I mean, for everybody's side, whether that's you're on China's side or you're on business's side or you're on the side of the United States. But I think it's a very difficult time. Going back to the timeline, I mean, 75 days is not going to get it through the legislative process. 75 days could be done like we're talking about with the executive, which can extend stuff. And then if people the legislature is upset about it, then they can certainly, legislate some stuff. Somebody can start a court case, which, I mean, they've already done with regards to everything that Mr. Trump is, not everything, but just about everything he signed off on. So just to get back to the question here is, I think he's changed his course with regards to TikTok because it was one of the things that got him, in my opinion, elected, and that's what he said as well. So I think he thinks that there's some value in it, and I think that legacy media is falling off in the United States for a whole bunch of reasons, perhaps self-inflicted, and this may be the wave of the future, but you got to take both the good with the bad. And so it reflects kind of a political pragmatism Mr. Trump has, and the evolving, geopolitical realities and the electoral calculations, because he's got 2027. Where are we? Coming up with a new round of elections that will be for the Congress and the midterms, what they call, and usually that's when the party that won the general election winds up taking a bath, and there's a movement. So the very small majority in the House, very small majority in the Senate, and which allows him to have control of Congress. And I think he thinks TikTok might be helpful for these guys and for the Republican Party.
You're listening to the Chat Lounge. We've been discussing the latest developments with TikTok in the U.S. Coming up, we will examine the best and worst possible outcomes for TikTok in America after the 75-day extension. Stay with us.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Chat Lounge. Let's continue our discussion. Digby, if after 75 days no agreement is reached between the company and also the U.S. government, what do you think are the chances of TikTok being banned in America?
Well, I clearly the trend is to not ban it, because in an interview, Elon Musk did an interview about a week ago, and in that interview he said one of the key emphasis for the Trump campaign has been freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and they've been supporting that really clearly, and there's reasons for that, because obviously they've changed the LGBTQ standing for government, for example, so they've got to offset that with something else, and I think the First Amendment is one of those things. But then he said, well, look, if we ban TikTok, what's going to happen to Twitter? Then what's going to happen to other platforms? You see, he can see that that's what's going to happen here. It's going to set the precedent, and whatever the precedent is, everybody's going to copy that. It's going to set a new standard, and the fear, of course, is if you ban something like TikTok, Well, then what's to stop every country in the world saying, oh, well, we'll just do that to Facebook, we'll just do that to Twitter, we'll just do that to somebody else. I think that's a clear red flag for everybody. So the best solution here is, 75 days. I agree with everybody. It's not going to be long enough, but I don't think that TikTok's going to be closed. What's going to happen is it'll be extended until they can get to an agreement that works and that TikTok is functioning. And Trump said himself he's had the best showing. The Republicans have had the best showing with youth groups, so 18 to 25, I'd even stretch that 18 to 34, but the key audience group is 18 to 24, and they got a 37% youth vote. I mean, that's fantastic. That's the best they've ever had. So they're not going to give up. Even though the 75 days is not long enough, they're not going to give up on that. They realize it's a precedent. They realize that it's going to set the standard globally. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think TikTok will be resurrected, but in a new functionality. And then I think we'll see a wave of techno-nationalism going through BRICS countries, for example. They're going to be looking very closely at the American tech monopolies. Microsoft, all those companies, Facebook, Tesla, and everything else. They're going to be looking at that and saying, okay, what about social media here? What about platforms of all kinds? Shouldn't they be joint ventures? And I think you're going to see a wave of this thing happening over the next 2 years, 3 years.
Haolan, you're in America. We know how popular TikTok is over there, and it has 170 million users and plays a positive role in boosting U.S. employment and consumption. So even though, as Digby and Edward said, there's little chance for TikTok to be banned in America, but if that happened, how would the ban on TikTok impact the U.S. economy, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, influencers, and individuals who rely on the platform for their livelihood?
Yes, of course, TikTok is becoming what they call a phenomenon, and on the social media app. And I think the ecosystem of any social media is an ecosystem, not just necessarily just all the business side, but also just the sheer size of the users. 170 million of them will have some significant financial impact on the economy. And all the ad revenues and all these content creators that have been using TikTok as a livelihood would likely go away if TikTok is permanently banned. So that's why I think, as what Digby was talking about, it's very unlikely that TikTok will go dark. It will be some sort of arrangements going, but we don't know what's going to happen. But the U.S. economy is such a big and complex economic entity. So you can't really say that without TikTok, everything will fall apart. But for, I think, 7 million people who has been using TikTok as part of their livelihood, including all those fast-growing e-commerce sites and stores on TikTok Shop, which has been part of the biggest growth, I think, in the new e-commerce, emergence of e-commerce in America in the past 2 years. And a lot of these merchants rely heavily on TikTok shops, and their business will obviously be impacted significantly. And most of them are small and medium-sized businesses, so they're not the national, the cross-national big companies. And that is going to have I think, put much more pressures on the fragile state of the economy, as President Trump has been promising to restore. Because as he was talking about, that the American economy was suffering under Joe Biden, and given that he's trying to focus exclusively on the making America great again in his second term, and that wouldn't be a great economic outlook. And of course, there are political reasons, I think, as Lehman was talking about as well. So it's going to have a significant impact, but we can't say that it's going to have earth-shattering changes.
Edward, if TikTok is forced into a joint venture, what kind of precedent would that set? For example, could other countries follow the U.S. lead and ban TikTok in the same way? And at the same time, could these countries use the same reasoning, the national security concern, to ban U.S.-owned social media platforms like X, like YouTube, Facebook, in their own countries?
Yeah, I mean, right. I think it could escalate things, as you've rightly pointed out, and the other guests have talked about, or it could, is it possible after 75 days that the TikTok, a deal won't get done and it goes dark? It went dark already apparently before, and it could go dark again. Let me just say the end is not nigh if that happens. It's unfortunate, but I mean, I think TikTok and ByteDance will go on and be, and there, there's a time in which there was MySpace was like the major character or player. There was a time in which Yahoo was a big search engine. So and then a whole bunch of other ones that we don't even remember, like Netscape and everything else. So do I think that something bigger, faster, stronger could come and take its place? I know it seems like impossible, but yeah, it could get banned. I think it would escalate, and I think that then we become extremely tribal, where national security concerns are the thing that will actually, which is crossing borders, but to the advantage of not only ByteDance, but it's the advantage of Meta, which is the owner, and Microsoft and a whole bunch of other well-known players that keep kind of sort of changing their name or their outcome or whatever they want to do. But it will also wind up hurting those guys as well. If you remember, or if you saw that when Mr. Trump was sworn in, the Google person was there, Elon Musk was there, Tim Cook was there from Apple, Mr. Zuckerberg from Meta, he was there. So they were all there. I don't know what that says, other than people are interested in the tech space, and it's the impact of what's happening with this particular case will make a difference. The other thing we haven't really talked about at all is that legal liability for a lot of these organizations has been curtailed by the Congress, and that may or may not become a concern for people like Meta and other platforms, Oracle and everything else, where they've sort of gotten a pass from a liability standpoint that other media doesn't necessarily have. You're also seeing a collision of what's happening. So if you look at Meta, Mr. Zuckerberg has decided to take the pathway of having less fact checkers like X or the former Twitter has done, Elon Musk. So what we're seeing here is there's a possibility of a ban. We're also seeing that things are going to, and this goes into what Digby had talked about, which is the First Amendment issue, which Mr. Musk wants to promote. And America is kind of unique in that it does have this. Canada doesn't have it. The United Kingdom or New Zealand or Australia, to the best of my knowledge, don't have full-on freedom of speech. And that's one of the things that is distinctive about the United States and some other places. And so, shutting that down is a bad symbol, I think, to the United States. But it's not the only thing that's concerning about shutting it down. Now, if it does go forward with the full-blown ban, I think that you've got a bunch of things. One is the technical stuff that's going to be lost, perhaps. The other one is diplomatic tensions. And this race to the bottom with regards to the different countries deciding that they're going to make the Egyptian version of Facebook operate, or the Egyptian version, or whatever, the Guyanan, and you take any nation and you say, we're going to put up walls. And that's not going to be probably beneficial for anyone from a business perspective, but certainly not for international relations and diplomacy between borders for folks, which things seem to be moving in that direction, unfortunately.
Digby, there are voices suggesting that the ban on TikTok is inevitable. Not only TikTok, but any social media platforms or apps developed by Chinese people that becomes popular and mainstream in America will face the same fate. So what are your thoughts on the future development of other Chinese social media platforms overseas, especially in the U.S. market?
Oh, I think that's it. The Chinese media has a huge future. I think there's no doubt about that. In fact, all Chinese brands, because look, the Chinese market is the largest market in the world. There's no doubt about that. But it's also the largest market specifically in areas that are really cutting edge. So AI, social media, EVs, batteries, all that stuff, right? Tech, solar, renewable, all that stuff. China is leading and setting the standards. So I think you're going to find that there's going to Chinese social media, like TikTok, is very flexible and adaptable, and it's adapted to the American environment very, very well. And I think this can continue to happen. Talking about Elon Musk said immediately that Twitter, that he basically copied. He took Twitter and he just copied Tencent, WeChat. Said that's what I want it to be, a super app, and that's basically what everybody's doing. But I still think WeChat's by far the best. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think yes, it is going to expand. All these Chinese brands, especially in the tech sector, have a huge future. But this TikTok in America is going to, and I hate to repeat myself, but this is going to set the standard going forward. Not just for Chinese tech companies expanding overseas, which they're certainly going to be doing, but also other countries are going to doing this with theirs as well. So the US, for example, and their companies. And as Edward just said, Nigeria or somewhere might just decide, well, hang on a second, we want Facebook to have a joint venture. And I think there's the real possibility of this happening as we go forward. But even more so, I think the power of creators is going to become greater than the platforms themselves. So we're all concentrating on platforms. But as those sort of become global, the real influence is going to be on the actual content creators, because Mr. Beast has got 300 million followers on YouTube. He's now put his name forward to be one of the purchasers of TikTok, whether that's just for publicity reasons, I don't know. But he's a very, very wealthy individual, and he's got other backers with him that could make that possible. And I think that shows you that content creators are the new power, and that's really where it's going to go. And at the end of the day in media, it's always about content.
Sorry, but just a comment on what Digby was saying is, what I saw, and again, I'm not so well versed in all, but there was, Xiaohongshu is then when there was a shutdown with TikTok, then it seemed to be that some American entrepreneurs of the whatever they are, 7 million or 170 million, that's quite a number, of U.S. users, they were emigrating to another Chinese app. So, I mean, China seems to have got things right. And the other thing is that maybe, and this not to overstate what Digby and the other guests has been sharing, is that after Second World War, the reason why global trade flourished was because most of the countries were flat on their backs, with a few exceptions that hadn't been, the countries hadn't been completely destroyed. And then the United States, like it or good, bad, or indifferent, I mean, they kind of owned the seafaring rights and the protection of goods and things moving from international borders. So this may be similar to the post-1945. I mean, this whole thing is happening with TikTok with information. Okay, so and this is the template that Digby was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And this is going to set the stage for freedom of information that's going to be passed on. There's this tendency for nations, and that's why you have borders, and that's why you have a security that says the information must remain without unless you get it cleared within the nation before it's going out. So this is the tip of the spear as to what is going to happen, and whether this is going to be international or going to retract. So I don't know if anyone knows the outcome, and I'm not sure that anyone's looking at it from that perspective right now. But I do think it's about geopolitical rivalry, but it's also about the foreign influence and data privacy issues with regards to each of these countries as well, and where people are going to go.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Haolan, we know Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube have all tried to replicate TikTok by launching their own short video features, but have not been very successful. So why can't American social media giants, compete with TikTok and develop a popular app on their own?
This is obviously a very complex question, because anytime an app or just a company is successful, there are multiple factors at play. So sometimes it's just luck. And for TikTok, I think no doubt because they're the pioneers of the short video platform, and they became the first one to eat the crabs, so I'm saying. And so they basically occupied the center stage ever since. And that become very difficult for the up-and-comers like Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to catch up, even though they have such a already big presence in the Americans' life. So I think that's sort of the first reason. But I think the second or deeper reason is that many of the American tech companies may not want to admit this, but basically that the TikTok algorithms and the design and the features of the apps is just superior to their products. And people are attached to whatever TikTok is feeding them and tailoring to their needs. And that's something I think many of the American tech companies have to think about, especially given that we see the success of Xiaohongshu, what shall we say, unexpected success of Xiaohongshu in the light of a potential TikTok ban. And the fact that many of the users, although it's only a very slight slice of the 170 million TikTok users, chose to go to another Chinese platform instead of going to more of the organic American ones that are already in place on Instagrams and YouTube, saying something about the nature of these companies. So I think, as Digby was talking about, that WeChat is one of the best instant communication softwares, and that's something I think the American tech company hasn't experienced before, because they basically has sort of this monopoly or superior complex for better part of 2 decades now, down the 21st centuries, and they're now waking up to the reality that someone from across the ocean in China, the media companies, can make a better software. I think that's something that many of the American legislators are also having difficulty of trying to understand the situation. But it's going to become increasingly, I think, more likely coming down the line, which is going to make this, what Digby was talking about, the technology nationalism, much more prominent and more important.
I just mentioned that some of those U.S. legislators I watched this morning, I just rewatched the Senate inquiry that had Mao Ying, was answering questions, and some of the questions that were asked of him by the senators, the congressmen, I was just unbelievably naive. And one fellow even said, "Well, I've never even heard of Singapore. Where's that?" I just thought that tells you so much about, you've got American legislators who don't even know where Singapore is. I mean, how are they going to make, really difficult decisions about media companies, about data transfer, technology transfers? How are they going to make informed decisions when they don't know where Singapore is? I mean, that's one of the biggest failings, and I think that goes to what a previous guest just said, and that is that America is surprised. I mean, it's kind of a hubris, I suppose, or an arrogance, or just ignorance, imagining that nobody else can do this kind of thing. They don't understand, they don't know how to do it, and clearly China has shown, and others, of course, have shown, the US has shown that this can happen. And I think that there's going to, the success, that immediate success of Xiaohongshu, and I think Bilibili and lots of other Chinese tech companies are going to surprise everybody with just how convenient they are, how smoothly they work. And immediately I'm thinking about the operating system that Huawei's come out with. Harmony OS, for example, that's a real change. That's better than Android. I think that's going to grow, especially in the Belt and Road countries. That's like 140 countries, right? So the global south, you might call that. But China, I think, is really focused on that area, and maybe America is not going to be the main focus. I mean, it is now because of the inauguration and Trump and all of that stuff, tariffs and so forth. But I think that, behind all of this is, who is going to control the data flows and the social media and the platforms and the apps in all of across the world. And at the moment, it's the American companies, but I think that's going to change. And we're going to see, much more infiltration by Chinese companies into those markets as we go forward, definitely over the next 2-3 years. And this is only going to speed that up.
Edward, some suggest that since Trump has taken office, both the U.S. and China need an opportunity to rebuild a positive relationship, and TikTok could serve as that opportunity and platform. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, great point, great question. And I think it is a great opportunity. And I think Mr. Trump, which is really interesting, I mean, on that first day in office and second day, I guess, in office, he was giving such a long dialogue with the press. I think he answered, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, and no one's talked about it, but I think he answered more questions on that day than Biden did in 4 years. And I'm not trying to run down Mr. Biden, but I would say I would say it's probably someone should run the numbers on it, but that might be the case. But he did say himself that he did speak to Mr. President Xi about TikTok. So this is directly from Mr. Trump. And so it does appear to be a bridge building situation. I do think that, the TikTok culture is a cultural moment. I also think that the one thing we didn't really talk about is why did TikTok become so famous is because they look at Facebook as kind of the old guys thing, like a bunch of old people are in there, and the young people don't want to be where their parents are going to like observe them. Yeah. So there's kind of a cultural shift. And the idea is that TikTok came out, but can this act as a bridge between U.S.-China relations? Absolutely, positively. And I think that somehow, who would have thought Mr. Trump, who initiated this, a TikTok ban, would be the one who would sort of save it. We have seen Mr. Trump do a 180 on things. ZTE was also facing the death of ZTE essentially, and I don't know what happened, but that was turned around. So I think somehow there could be good that comes from all this. But this is a discussion. It's a tough one, but it's a discussion that needs to be had between leadership and between businesses in order to figure out how to go forward in this information age. No doubt about it.
Digby and Haolan, what's your take on Edward's remarks? Like, could TikTok become a turning point for improving relations between China and U.S.?
I'll go first and say that I agree with Edward. I do believe that this, because all of the different levels of government that are going to have to cooperate. Different ministries from China, different ministries, departments, state departments in America, all of their departments, so commerce, technology, all that sort of stuff, efficiency, they're all going to have to communicate at a level they have not done probably since Trump was in office last time, which one needs to remember that it was Trump that set all this off originally, that big turnaround that he's done, I think this is going to be really important, and those networks that have been shut down over the last 5 years, they are all going to start growing again like roots of a tree, and they'll connect, and that's really important because that means going forward into other areas, which are going to be bigger than TikTok. Basic technology, AI chips, all that stuff, that's going to end up being bigger, EV, solar. It's going to set the road, the pathway for those, and it's going to have those connections are going to be rebuilt, and that's going to be very useful. And my only worry is, of course, is that Trump's security policies might upset the commercial policies. But look, Trump is definitely transactional, definitely pragmatic, definitely intense commercial competition going forward, and that's a very good break from the Biden 4 years, and so TikTok's going to be a big part of that.
Haolan, how about you?
Sure, yes. I think I agree with all. Basically, that it could be a wedge issue that, given basically what the static U.S.-China relationship for the past 4 years. And this isn't really just a reflection of the Biden policy, but I think just the angle of the Biden administration's that the strong ideological desire behind, I think, Biden himself on these issues. And Trump is not an ideological person, at least on this issue and on many other foreign policy issues. And he could become sort of a new surprise, given that his willingness to think outside of the box. So anything related to TikTok or even just broader U.S.-China relationships, it's just the emblem of the second Trump administration, I think. Basically, there will be a lot of risk involving his decision makings, but also many outside of the box opportunities, rapprochements, and cooperations. And this, while being tragic in a sense, they're just business, that the global businesses are getting suffered because of national security concerns that are often unproven and difficult to prove and unprove. But it could also become sort of a new way of cooperation, because it will be a template for cooperation between U.S.-China government and also the companies that are going to be selling and buying and hosting TikToks.
With that, we're wrapping up this episode of the Chat Lounge. I've been speaking with Wang Haolan, a research assistant at Asia Society Policy Institute Center for China Analysis, Edward Lehman, a legal affairs commentator and managing director of Lehman, Lee & Xu law firm, and Dr. Digby Wren, an external relations advisor to the Royal Academy of Cambodia. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.